At 20:17 a.m., the room is dark except for the blue glow of your phone. You reread a message you never sent, then lock the screen, then unlock it again. Somewhere between the silence and your racing thoughts, something quietly slips away. And the strange part is, you can't quite explain why. It doesn't feel dramatic. There's no single moment where everything breaks. No obvious mistake. Just a slow, almost polite erosion. Like confidence leaking out through cracks you didn't know were there. Most people imagine self-sabotage as something loud, big decisions, explosions. But this version is quieter. It hides in routines, in habits so small they barely register. And yet, over time, they change the way you stand, the way you speak, the way you look at yourself in the mirror when no one's watching. If you're someone who lives in your head, who replays conversations long after they end, who feels everything a little too deeply, you may recognize this pattern before you can name it. It often starts at night. Late nights. The kind where the world feels paused and your thoughts finally get the microphone. You scroll past faces, achievements, lives that seem oddly confident, oddly certain. You tell yourself you're just relaxing, just unwinding. But somewhere in your chest, there's a faint tightening, a comparison you didn't ask for. A quiet sentence forms, I should be further than this. You don't argue with it. You just let it sit there. The next day, it shows up differently. You hesitate before replying to a message. You rewrite a sentence 3 times, then decide not to send it at all. Not because you don't care, but because you care too much. Because your mind offers 10 possible interpretations of how it could be received, and none of them feel safe, so you wait. And waiting feels responsible, thoughtful. But each time you do it, something subtle happens. You teach yourself that your first instinct isn't trustworthy, that your voice needs extra checking, extra filtering. Confidence erosion through small daily self-sabotaging habits doesn't announce itself. It whispers. You might notice it in rooms, quiet rooms, meetings where you know the answer, but let the silence stretch just a second too long. Someone else speaks and you nod. Even though the words were already forming in your mind, you tell yourself it didn't matter, that it wasn't worth the risk. But later, alone, you replay it. You imagine how it would have sounded if you had spoken, clear, calm, maybe even respected. That replay isn't harmless. It's another tiny withdrawal. In the previous video on high intelligence paired with emotional loneliness, we talked about how being deeply perceptive can isolate you. How noticing everything sometimes means carrying more than others see. This is one of the places that weight lands. When you're highly aware, you're also highly cautious. And caution, repeated daily, can quietly turn into self-silencing. Not because you're weak, but because you're trying to protect something fragile inside you. Think about mornings, quiet mornings. Standing in front of the mirror, brushing your teeth, eyes slightly unfocused. You don't insult yourself outright. You're too subtle for that. Instead, you delay. You hesitate. You think, I'll start later. I'll speak up next time. I'll show up when I'm more ready. But later becomes a habit. Another micro loop opens here. Why does readiness always feel just one step away? Confidence isn't lost all at once. It's negotiated away, in tiny compromises with yourself. You skip the walk you promised you'd take. You avoid eye contact because it feels intense today. You laugh softly instead of fully, just in case. None of these choices feel harmful on their own. That's the trick. Even your inner dialogue sounds reasonable. Don't overdo it. Don't be annoying. Read the room? These thoughts feel intelligent, measured. But slowly, they train you to shrink. You might notice it in your body before your mind catches up. Shoulders slightly hunched. Breath held longer than necessary. A sense that you're taking up just enough space to not be noticed. And here's the unsettling part. The more you do this, the more unfamiliar confidence begins to feel. Like a personality trait you once had, not something you can access now. Late at night, again you think about who you used to be, or who you almost were. You wonder when things got so complicated. When every interaction started feeling like a test you didn't study for. You open your phone, close it, open it again. Another small habit, another quiet retreat. Sometimes confidence erosion looks like being low maintenance, not asking for clarity, not expressing disappointment, telling yourself you're fine with things you're not fine with. You pride yourself on being easy to be around, emotionally intelligent, understanding. But underneath that understanding is a pattern. Your needs always come second. Your reactions are edited. Your truth is delayed. How often do you catch yourself doing that? This connects back to that earlier conversation about emotional loneliness. When you're deeply attuned, you often sense shifts before words appear. You notice tone changes, pauses, energy, and so you adapt, you preempt, you minimize, you disappear just enough to keep the peace. It works, socially. But internally something starts to ache. Confidence needs friction, expression, small risks taken and survived. When those risks are avoided daily, confidence doesn't just stay the same, it slowly forgets how to exist. There's a moment many people recognize: standing in line, sitting on a bus, alone in a crowded place. You feel oddly invisible, not because others are ignoring you, but because you've been ignoring yourself. You think, I used to have more presence than this. That thought lingers. It doesn't accuse, it observes. Here's another open loop to sit with. If these habits are so small, so reasonable, how much of your confidence has been shaped without you noticing? This isn't about fixing anything, or pushing yourself, or becoming louder overnight. It's about noticing the pattern, the quiet agreement you make with fear every day, the way self-protection slowly becomes self-erasure. The room goes quiet again, the phone screen glows, your reflection looks back at you, familiar and distant at the same time. Maybe confidence hasn't disappeared. Maybe it's just been patiently waiting for you to stop negotiating against it. And maybe the real question isn't how to rebuild confidence, but why it felt safer to let it fade in the first place. Confidence doesn't collapse. It thins out quietly. It rarely arrives as a breaking point. There is no single day where you wake up and realize something is gone. Instead, it fades in a way that's almost courteous. It leaves room for excuses. It allows logic to soften the loss. You still function. You still show up. You still think clearly. But something about how you inhabit yourself changes, so subtly that it feels unreasonable to question it. At first, it looks like maturity. You pause before speaking. You think before acting. You choose restraint over impulse. People might even compliment you for being calm, thoughtful, self-aware. And you accept that description because it sounds like growth. But confidence doesn't disappear because you became reckless before. It disappears because you became cautious everywhere. The thinning starts with small edits. You remove a sentence from a message because it might be misunderstood. You don't ask the follow-up question because you don't want to seem difficult. You soften your tone, then soften it again, until what you're saying barely resembles what you meant. None of this feels like self-betrayal in the moment. It feels like social intelligence, emotional regulation, reading the room. But every edit teaches your nervous system something. It teaches it that your first instinct needs correction, that your raw response is a liability. That safety lives one step behind your true reaction. Confidence relies on continuity between thought and expression. When that continuity is interrupted repeatedly, confidence doesn't shatter, it stretches thin. Like fabric pulled too many times in small directions. You can see it in everyday moments. Standing in a group conversation, feeling the timing slip away as you wait for the perfect opening. By the time you're ready, the moment has passed. You tell yourself it's fine. It wasn't important. But your body noticed the hesitation. It noticed the holding back. It logged the delay. Or you notice it alone, replaying a conversation hours later, realizing what you wanted to say. Not in a dramatic way. Just a sentence, a clarification, a boundary. You imagine how it would have landed. You imagine yourself saying it calmly, confidently. And there's a quiet grief there. Not over what happened, but over the version of you that didn't show up. Confidence thins because it's rarely reinforced. It needs feedback. It needs moments where you act and survive the outcome. When action is replaced by rumination, the mind stays busy but the self stays untested. Overthinkers are especially vulnerable to this. Not because they lack insight, but because insight becomes a substitute for movement. You analyze yourself so thoroughly that there's no space left for instinct. You predict outcomes before they occur. You simulate reactions. You pre-feel rejection, embarrassment, misunderstanding. And since you already experienced the discomfort internally, there's no urgency to act externally. The mind mistakes this for protection. The body experiences it as erosion. Confidence also thins through avoidance that feels reasonable. Avoiding eye contact on days when you feel exposed. Avoiding difficult conversations because the timing isn't right. Avoiding new environments because you're tired. Each choice makes sense in isolation. But confidence doesn't measure intention, it measures repetition. What you repeat becomes what you believe about yourself. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly monitoring yourself. Watching your tone, tracking your expressions, managing impressions. That exhaustion isn't loud, but it's persistent, and over time it convinces you that expressing yourself is effortful, risky, costly. So you conserve energy by shrinking, not dramatically, just enough to stay comfortable, just enough to stay unnoticed. Confidence thinning also shows up in how you make decisions. You second-guess preferences. You look to others for cues. You delay choices, waiting for certainty that never quite arrives. You tell yourself you're being careful. But underneath, there's a growing unfamiliarity with your own authority. Authority doesn't mean dominance. It means self-trust. And self-trust erodes when you keep deferring to imagined outcomes instead of lived ones. There's also the internal language. It doesn't insult you outright. It sounds reasonable. I'll wait. It's not worth it. I don't want to overact. These phrases feel balanced, adult, composed, but repeated often enough, they train you to associate expression with excess, presence with risk. Confidence thins when your internal world becomes more vivid than your external one. When you feel things intensely but show them minimally. When your emotional life is rich but private. When no one else can see how much is happening inside you. That invisibility can start to feel like safety. But safety without expression slowly turns into disconnection. Not just from others, but from yourself. You might still recognize confidence conceptually. You see it in other people. You remember moments when it flowed naturally through you. But it begins to feel like something situational, conditional, dependent on the right mood, the right people, the right version of you. And the thinning continues. Not enough to alarm you. Not enough to stop your life. Just enough that standing fully in yourself feels unfamiliar. Like a posture you haven't used in a while. Like a voice that hasn't been exercised. Confidence doesn't collapse because collapse would be obvious. It would demand attention. Thinning is quieter. It happens while you're being reasonable. While you're adapting. While you're surviving. It happens while you tell yourself you'll speak next time. While you choose comfort over clarity. Confidence fades when expression is endlessly delayed. Not because you lack something internally, but because what lives inside you rarely gets permission to exit. Expression is the bridge between inner certainty and outer reality, and when that bridge is postponed again and again, confidence doesn't break. It waits, and waiting slowly changes its shape. It often begins with timing. You tell yourself it's not the right moment. You'll speak when things are calmer, when you've thought it through more, when you're less emotional, when you're more prepared. The intention feels responsible, even kind. You're trying not to disrupt, not to overact, not to complicate things. But every delayed expression teaches your system that your truth needs conditions to exist. Over time, those conditions become stricter. You start rehearsing conversations internally instead of having them. Full dialogues unfold in your mind. What you'd say, how they might respond, how you'd clarify, how you'd soften, how you'd recover if it went wrong. By the time the real moment arrives, it feels redundant, exhausting. You've already lived it, so you let it pass. That internal rehearsal gives the illusion of expression without the risk of being seen. But confidence doesn't grow from imagined outcomes. It grows from contact, from speaking and surviving the response. When expression stays internal, confidence has nothing to anchor itself to. Endless delay also creates a strange self-distrust. If you keep telling yourself, "Not yet," your mind begins to assume there's a reason. Maybe what you feel isn't clear enough. Maybe it's not valid enough. Maybe it will sound wrong once spoken. So instead of trusting your impulse, you interrogate it. And interrogation slows everything down. You might notice this in simple preferences. Choosing where to go, what to eat, what you want. You hesitate. You look outward. You wait for someone else to decide. It feels cooperative, easygoing. But underneath, your voice gets quieter from lack of use. Expression is a muscle. Delay is atrophy disguised as patience. For emotionally sensitive people, delay often comes from awareness. You feel the weight of impact. You sense how words ripple. You know how tone lingers, so you hold back, trying to be careful. But care without release turns inward. It loops, it tightens. You become fluent in containment. Confidence fades not because you don't know yourself, but because knowing never turns into showing. Your inner world becomes rich, detailed, complex, while your outer presence becomes minimal. People see a calm surface. They don't see the depth underneath. And eventually, you stop expecting them to. That expectation matters. Confidence thrives when you believe your expression belongs in the world. When you stop believing that, even subtly, expression starts to feel optional, extra risky. Delay also alters your sense of agency. When you don't act on thoughts as they arise, you experience yourself as passive, observing, waiting, responding late. Even when you finally speak, it often comes after the moment has cooled. When the emotional charge is gone, the words land flatter, less alive, and you mistake that flatness for proof that speaking didn't matter. But the truth is, timing carries energy. Expression delayed loses its vitality. There's also the physical aspect. The held breath, the tight jaw, the sensation of something unsaid sitting in your chest. Your body knows when expression is postponed. It holds the tension for you. Over time, that tension becomes familiar, normal. You stop noticing it until moments of unexpected release, a rare honest sentence, a sudden emotional response, feel almost overwhelming, which makes you retreat again. Endless delay teaches you that expression is dangerous because it feels intense. But it only feels intense because it's been stored for so long. Confidence fades when expression is endlessly delayed, because confidence is not a thought, it's a feedback loop. Act, respond, adjust. When action is removed, the loop collapses into contemplation. You become excellent at understanding yourself, but less practiced at inhabiting yourself. You may still have strong opinions, values, insights, but they live privately, safely, untested. And untested beliefs don't feel solid. They feel theoretical. This shows up socially as well. You laugh a second too late. You agree automatically. You let conversations move past you. Later alone, your real thoughts surface. They feel clearer there, stronger there. But alone is not where confidence is built. Confidence is relational. Even when it's quiet, even when it's subtle, it needs interaction to exist. Delay also reinforces the belief that expression requires perfection. That you should wait until you can say it just right. Until you've eliminated misunderstanding. Until your emotions are clean, linear, digestible. But expression was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be alive. The longer you wait, the more unrealistic the standard becomes. Eventually, nothing feels ready enough. And so you keep waiting. You might notice a growing distance between who you are internally and how you move through the world. A sense that people don't really know you. Not because they wouldn't understand, but because you haven't let them see. That distance can feel lonely, but also controlled. You choose invisibility over vulnerability. Confidence fades in that space between safety and silence. Not abruptly, not tragically, just gradually. Like color washing out of fabric. Like a voice unused becoming softer. Like presence becoming optional. You don't lose confidence because you failed. You lose it because you postponed showing up one too many times. Because each delay made the next one easier.